Welcome to Wellbeing Unwrapped, the show where real talk leads to real transformation.
I'm Jamie McKagan, a fitness trainer and life coach.
And I'm Tracy Carroll, a self-esteem and mindset coach.
And on today's episode, we'll be unwrapping anxiety. Hello. Have you ever felt your heart race for no apparent reason? Do you struggle to fall asleep because your mind won't stop worrying? Or maybe you've even found yourself avoiding certain situations because a sense of dread or unease is holding you back. If any of this sounds familiar, you're not alone. In fact, you could be one of the approximately 8.2 million people in the UK experiencing an anxiety disorder at any one time, with 45% of those reporting that it severely affects their ability to function in daily life, impacting work, relationships, and social interactions. With only 1 in 4 individuals with an anxiety disorder in the UK receiving treatment, it's clear that many are left struggling without the support they need. So today we're focusing on providing practical information and tools that you can start using right away to better understand and manage your anxiety.
Coming up, we're going to be answering some of your questions that have been emailed into us. If you have any questions today or in the future for our episodes, then please drop us an email at wellbeingunwrapped@gmail.com.
So Tracy, I think it's important maybe to start with understanding what anxiety is. And I'm going to throw it over to you because I think everyone knows that anxiety is a natural response to stress, right? But can we go deeper into that? So what causes that feeling and when do we know if it starts to become a problem?
So I would liken anxiety to a sense of unease, a feeling of fear or worry in the body. And it can often be attached to a specific situation.
Like a trigger.
To a trigger. But like also it can be really hard to dictate why. It could be something that somebody, from the moment they wake up in the morning to the moment they go to bed, they can have that feel of unease within their body with other accompanying symptoms, which will vary from person to person. But as I say, some people will find that there will be a specific trigger, and that can be different for everyone.
So that's really interesting, Tracy. So we're saying, and you're saying that there could be a specific trigger, e.g. going outside, certain words, certain films, certain pieces of music, or there could be a generalised feeling of anxiousness that you're saying you've seen people that they just have that really all the time, that sits with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I do think that a lot of that will depend on their background, their lifestyle, whether they pay attention and do anything. I know my own personal experience. There were periods of anxiety here and there. Flying used to be a massive trigger for me. But for the most part, I ignored it. And this is something that I often talk to my clients about. Anxiety is a messenger. It's telling you, and it could be a whole host of different reasons for different people, but it's trying to send the message that something needs addressing. And if you liken it to a child who wants your attention and you're on the phone. So first of all, they're going to come up and they're going to tug on your skirt or your trousers and they're going to say, Mummy or Jamie or whoever, Daddy, Mummy, I need to ask you something. Yeah, in a minute. And you carry on talking. And then they do it again. Yeah, in a minute. I won't be a minute. I'm just finishing. And then and as it goes on, they get louder and louder and louder until all of a sudden you've got this toddler on your heels, screeching at you, having a full-on meltdown because you just didn't listen. That is what anxiety will do if you ignore it.
I mean, that is a great description of anxiety there, Tracy. That is absolutely fantastic. It just keeps on coming.
It just keeps going. It'll build and it'll build and it'll build and it will get worse and worse and worse. So for the people like I did who just ignore it, brush it aside, too busy, haven't got time, you brush it aside, it's not going anywhere until you deal with it, regardless of the cause.
So I think it's important to understand that anxiety is, as I said earlier, it is a natural response to stress, isn't it? And so if we're in a stressful situation, for example, I suddenly say to you, Tracy, or you say to me, you've got to go on stage and give a speech in front of 2,000 people. I'm going to feel anxious.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But just for that moment before I deliver the speech, once it's over, I feel fine. And in that situation, there's nothing to be done. It's normal. In fact, a lot of performers say, don't they, you should have some anxiousness, nerves before you go on stage.
Absolutely,
so that is one thing, isn't it? I think what we're saying is when that anxiety is daily, it's repetitive, it starts to impact on our daily lives and ability to go through our daily life.
Yeah, to function.
So if I was anxious about, going outside the house, that would be a problem because I've got to do that obviously every day in order for me to do the things that I want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've talked about anxiety and that in some situations anxiety is good because it indicates we need to do something, take some action, or it gives us a little boost before we get on stage and perform.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely fine. Or we run away from danger.
Yeah.
But in other situations, we need to address that.
Yeah.
And because it's so wide ranging, but what are some of the symptoms? I think our listeners would find this really interesting, that anxiety can cause in people. Shall we just go through some of of course it's wide ranging, but as I said, but let's go through some of the more common ones.
Oh yeah, okay. So off the top of my head, I would say heart palpitations, sweating, breathlessness, dizziness.
Yes, I think for me, I've suffered with a lot of anxiety, and for me, I always feel sick. So I feel very nauseous. Always is one. The heart palpitations, the sweatiness, as you then say, the lightheadedness. For some people, I know sleeping obviously becomes a problem. Eating too much or having no appetite. Increase in stimulants, so people drinking more coffee, cigarettes, drugs, alcohol use, all of these things can increase.
Yeah.
Tingling, numbness in the limbs especially, stomach ache, headaches, various muscle pains. I think those are some of the more common symptoms that people experience.
Yeah.
And I always say, it's important to say that, of course, if you suffer from any of these symptoms, you should, of course, firstly visit your GP and make sure that there is nothing else going on, because all of the symptoms Tracy and I have just described obviously could be attached to other conditions that you, of course, should look into.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important that you do seek medical advice in the first instance, regardless of how you want to approach it. It's always really important, because apart from anything else, then you can tick it off and say, it's not that. I'm not going to have a heart attack, or I haven't got a lung problem, or there's nothing else untoward going on. It is, dare I say it, just anxiety. And that's not said to diminish anxiety, because I know it can be life debilitating, and I've been there, done that myself. So the reason I say just is so that it's not something more untoward that will need specific medical treatment as such.
Absolutely. So that being the first port of call, going back to the symptoms of anxiety, and you've made sure it's nothing else, that can't be understated, can it? I mean, firstly, to be in that fight or flight state, because that's what it is, Tracy, isn't it? And to be in that permanently or frequently every day or every week is not good for the body. And we're not going to go, I know, too far into that now, but it does create a stress in the body when we are experiencing and we're in that fight and flight. And we don't want that to go on, because that in itself can cause further down the line all sorts of other issues that can come up. So that's one reason to address it. Secondly, having these symptoms will eventually, for lots of people, and does eventually stop them, doesn't it, being able to live their lives the way they want to. So they avoid certain situations, either due to their anxiety or due to the fact they're not sleeping, they're not eating, so they don't feel well enough, they haven't got any energy. It's a downward spiral, isn't it? Then you stop exercising, you stop socialising. And that's why often people will say that anxiety and depression are two sides of the same coin, because, of course, if you suffer from anxiety, eventually it can impact your life in such a way that that can then lead into depression, because you're not being able to live your life fully and get out and do the things that you want to do. So it is important, isn't it, to address anxiety, both psychologically but also for your poor body that's going
Yeah.
through all of this stress when you have got this low level of anxiety that may be having spikes here and there with panic attacks, and we'll know going to deal with specific panic attacks in another episode podcast, but I know that obviously when anxiety spikes, it's what is called a panic attack.
Yeah.
So it is important, isn't it, for people to seek help for their anxiety, because it's still,
absolutely.
you know, still people out there that will dismiss it and think, well, I just must battle through. But there's so much help, isn't there, for anxiety?
There's so many different avenues that you can take now. And as I said before, I'm guilty of leaving it. And I really wouldn't recommend it, because I did end up with that screaming toddler at my heels, and the breakdown that ensued from it was horrific. And it took me a good 18 months to literally rebuild my life from it. I actually got to the point that the dog that we had at that point, I wasn't able to walk him, because just although I wouldn't class myself as agoraphobic, I could go out, and I could go out if I was with other people. I felt safer with other people, but it took me 6 months before I could get back to walking him around the block, which I had done for years preceding this breakdown. So whatever stage you are at with your anxiety, you must listen to your body, listen to your mind, and seek some kind of help, even if it is if it's not the conventional go to the doctors and get antidepressants or anything. If you don't want to do that, that's not something that I personally did. It's really beneficial for some people, others don't want to do it. There's therapy, there's self-help books, there's a whole host of things that you can do. But yeah, I really can't stress enough, it's not going away on its own.
And with, as I said in the intro, 8.2 million people in the UK approximately experiencing an anxiety disorder at any one time. And what have we got at the minute? 70 million in the UK. That's a large percentage, isn't it? Tracy's going to work out that percentage, listeners, the 8.2 of 70 million.
I'll come back to you in 2026.
Let's just stick to anxiety today and not the math.
Yeah.
So you've heard me say, Tracy, the word disorder a couple of times here, and I just want to clarify that for our listeners, that we've spoken that in certain situations anxiety is useful and necessary for us. We don't like to label people, do we, on this program, or put them in boxes, but anxiety disorders, and we don't want to go into that today, but there are a number. There's generalized anxiety disorder, there's panic disorder, but these disorders occur when your anxiety, when your feelings of fear and worry become persistent and start interfering with your daily life, and that's what we've just been discussing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And whether or not you have an official diagnosis, and you absolutely do not need official diagnoses to obviously seek help or implement any of the things we're going to discuss today. But if anxiety is preventing you from living your life right now the way you want to, it is a sign that something needs to be addressed. And there are so many effective ways to do that.
Yeah.
Tracy, we've said that anxiety is a natural and normal response to certain situations. What is it, do you think, that causes it to become an issue, that causes us to feel anxious when we really don't need to? So what turns it into that disorder? So, for example, I feel anxious when I go outside, or you felt anxious when you started to walk the dog. What are some of the causes of this disordered anxiety?
There can be, again, a whole host of different reasons. Childhood trauma, even an accident can cause it. Sometimes certain situations can happen that don't necessarily even involve you, but then you kind of take it on board too much, and then worry maybe that the same thing's going to happen to you. A lot of stuff can relate back to when you're young, how you dealt with things back then, that what made you feel safe and what maybe now doesn't. Even just having generally a negative mindset can affect it. And in my personal case, I truly believe that my very poor self-esteem at the time actually led to it. I had very, very low self-esteem. I had a very negative mindset. Um, and it just kind of culminated because I wasn't taking care of myself and I didn't think um, kindly and compassionately about myself, that everything became an issue. I labelled myself as unable to cope with anything. I expected far too much from myself, and therefore put myself in really sort of ongoing situations that were very, very stressful, that just led to, I suppose, in a sense, like personal abuse of myself.
Mm. I think that's really interesting, what you've noted there, and you've mentioned trauma or stress, and absolutely, we've both seen a lot of that in our respective careers, haven't we? People that have experienced a trauma or a very
Mm,
stressful event, and
yeah,
it acts as a trigger, doesn't it? They've had an anxiety response to that,
yeah.
and the switch has never been turned off. It's like
No.
turning on a light switch, but it can't be turned off again, and they're
Mm,
reliving that event, and the memories are staying
yeah,
with them physically.
yeah,
So I definitely think that that is one thing. And when you've touched there on the self-esteem, so you're almost leaning into your personality, but your life experiences that have shaped you,
yeah.
then that has a big effect. And of course, a big one currently, aren't we recording this in Menopause Awareness Month? So hormonal changes massively now
Yeah,
linked to anxiety, especially around
yeah,
the menopause. As the hormones decrease and things change in the body, anxiety, perhaps for the first time ever in a woman's life,
yeah,
can rear its head. And of course, substance abuse.
yeah,
So we know that caffeine, alcohol, drugs, all of these stimulants are
yeah.
not good for anxiety and can cause it, will certainly exacerbate it.
Oh, absolutely. And what you've just got to remember is, kind of going back to my earlier point, anxiety is a messenger.
Mm,
So in those situations, it's saying something's not right.
mm,
So that something's not right could be your hormones are out of balance, or something's not right, you've got a very negative mindset and that needs dealing with, or something's not right, you're drinking too much alcohol, something's not right, you're um, poisoning your body with drugs, or overstimulating your body, or something's not right, you're not getting enough sleep.
mm.
it's it's that messenger, and it can be different for everyone, and it can be a mixture of a lot of things. One thing I would like just to clarify, that I was actually reading into the other day, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it because I can't remember exactly, but it was basically saying that different people will have a different definition of what trauma is. And this is something that um, you have to be quite careful of. So for me, um, before all of my training, I would have said trauma would have been um, a bereavement, or a really horrific car accident, or losing a child, something really, really big, really, really devastating. But in fact, what I was reading the other day is trauma is any event that is defined by your own mind with a negative label.
Mm.
So it doesn't have to be this huge big thing. And that was where I fell foul, because I could look around when I was younger. I had friends who'd had stillborns, who'd had miscarriages, who'd lost family members really young. I'd had all of these different experiences for other people. And I looked at myself and thought, well, I haven't had anything like that, so I shouldn't complain. I should just sort of stip up a lip and carry on. Whereas things had happened, maybe not to the same magnitude in my mind, but my mind had still treated them as a trauma. And that's really important for people to understand when they're listening to this.
I think that's a great thing to say, because I do think that so often we minimise our own distress, don't we, in trauma, because we think it's not as bad as someone else's, or we think that
100%.
what's happened is not bad enough, in
Yes.
quotation marks, to be classified as a traumatic
Exactly.
event. But of course, if it's traumatic to you, it's traumatic to you. If it's
Exactly.
traumatic to your brain and your body,
Yeah.
then it's a trauma. And I think
Totally.
it's important to recognise
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I just wanted to say, Tracy, before we moved on, that in terms of this, I think this is important just to mention this for everyone listening, in terms of the causes of anxiety. What we haven't talked about is obviously the brain chemistry, and an imbalance of neurotransmitters, your chemicals in the brain like serotonin and dopamine, can affect mood regulation and lead to anxiety. And this is why both Tracy and I have said that it definitely should be your first protocol to go to the doctor, because it may be in some instances that medication is required. And obviously
Yeah.
Tracy and I would never be handing out advice that
Oh, no.
went against
No, exactly.
you know, going to see your doctor. And in some cases,
Yeah.
that is required. However, let's move on with our advice, Tracy. And I've got a question here from Carol, and I know we're both going to want to answer this, who says, I miss out on lots of things because of my anxiety. How can I change this? Now, Carol hasn't been specific, so we're not sure whether she misses out on social events because she's got a social anxiety,
Yeah.
whether she has difficulties at the moment with going outdoors, or whether there's another reason. So we're going to answer it from a number of different angles. But Tracy, do you want to start with what Carol might be able to do? I miss out on lots of things because of my anxiety. What could she do to change this?
Right. So I think in general, the first port of call will be to level the playing field. Okay. So if you think of anxiety, and everybody has heard of the fight, flight, freeze response, um, which I always liken to way back when we used to live in caves. Um, you would live in packs, and if a saber-toothed tiger came along, you would want to be in that fight, flight, or freeze, okay? Because you would want to be getting away from that saber-toothed tiger. In that instance, it's really, really important that you're in that situation. But all the other times, you need to be calm and tell yourself that you're safe, okay? You need to be feeling calm, safe, at peace. That's the first thing to do, okay? You cannot change anything or try to make adaptations to your lifestyle until you have leveled that playing field and you are feeling more calm in yourself, okay? But once you are in that and you're not constantly in fight or flight mode, I would go for gradual exposure.
Right.
So I've used this on a number of occasions personally. I used it again when I was talking earlier about when I walk my dog. And I've also used it because I, for a number of years, couldn't drive very far at all. And I started using that to gradually expose myself to more and more distances. The same with the dog. To begin with, I'd walk to the end of the drive and back. Sounds a bit pathetic, but if you've been there, you know how bad it is. Then I would go 2 more houses down and return. But I only ever pushed myself to the point that I was starting to feel uncomfortable. And then I would retreat and I would do that until that makes me, that's fine. I feel fine doing this. And then I push myself a bit further. But you have to have that baseline first. You've got to be out of that mode before you can go there.
So that's great, Tracy. What you're saying is, because I've obviously heard of gradual exposure, you're saying, advising people that this needs to be done from a state of calm.
Yes.
So the first thing to do is to pick a time when you're not anxious, or
Yes.
bring yourself out of that anxious
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
And from that sense of calm, you can then move into gradual exposure.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's the same, isn't it? Same as decision making. You need to be in a calm state to make your decisions. And when you said the saber-toothed tiger, we need to be calm to decide, are we going to be able to outrun the tiger?
Yeah.
Do we need to hide from the tiger?
Yeah.
Can we fight the tiger? But we can't make any decision if our brain is flying in all directions.
No.
So we need to bring ourselves to that centre of calm. And Tracy, we've got some tips, haven't we?
Yeah.
On how to do that
absolutely.
coming up. But then from that point, it is that gradual exposure. Whatever it is that you're nervous about, you gradually expose yourself to that situation.
So if it is that she currently finds it really uncomfortable to go out, start by opening the front door and just stand there and just take in the world. If she can go a bit further, take a few steps out. As you say, we don't know exactly what Carol's issue is.
No.
If it is social anxiety,
Anxiety.
say, I mean, it sounds like another silly thing. For quite a while, I couldn't go to the cinema with the boys, okay, because I had this feeling that I was going to get in the middle of the film and I was going to panic and I was going to need to leave. And I couldn't leave two young children in a cinema on their own, but I also couldn't take them out, ruin their day, and also explain to them what was going on in Mummy's head because I didn't know myself. So I avoided it. But when I started getting to the point that I thought, oh, I could do this, I was like, okay, I'm going to sit on the aisle because it's an easy get out. And then when I got a bit braver, okay, well, I'll go a little bit further in. And then it just gradually builds up. If she's having trouble going out with friends to loud places, go to a coffee shop. On like a
quiet coffee shop.
Quiet coffee shop.
Yes.
Okay. Go somewhere quiet to start with. If the crowds are an issue, it really does, Carol. It really does depend on what the issue is, but gradual exposure
works with everything.
It really does, and don't worry about how ridiculously small you have to break it down.
And I think it's important to remember, isn't it, Tracy, that avoidance only reinforces the anxiety in the long run.
Oh, yes.
It's not going to do you any good to allow your anxiety to fence you in and only live within those bounds. And in fact, even it might creep further because you don't take a stand against it. It's going to take a step closer. It's like having a fight.
Exactly.
Step closer again.
It does.
So,
that is exactly as you were saying that, Jamie. I'm thinking to myself, this is another thing that I've spoken about at length with different clients. It's not just a case of, oh, that's okay, I can't drive on the motorway. Oh, actually, no, now I can't drive on A roads. Actually, now, no, I can't drive on country roads. Because what happens is our minds it labels and it batches things together. It groups things together. So where you could have an issue in the beginning of, I don't know, whether it's driving or say, for some reason you can't go into Tesco's anymore. Okay, but all of a sudden it's not just Tesco's, that maybe you've had a panic attack in Tesco's one day, or somebody's been really, really rude, confronted you over something and sent you into a meltdown. Your mind will then say, well, okay, well, this shop and this shop and this shop, they're all food shops too. So actually you can't go in those food shops either. Okay, you're now avoiding all the supermarkets. So there's definitely a problem. Oh, well, the clothes shops, they're a similar shop. And that's what happens. The walls do close in, and they will close in and close in and close in until you are stuck at home.
I think that's great. I mean, that is great advice, and that is exactly what's going to happen.
You have got to always be pushing out,
pushing the wall back.
No matter how small the step, you have always got to be actively pushing out.
And Carol, what I found very helpful with my anxiety, which then developed into, I developed agoraphobia as a secondary complication of that, and I've spent months of my life indoors, unable to go out. And one of the things that worried me about my agoraphobia was I didn't want to be sick in public. Now, this is going to sound crazy, but it's actually quite a common fear, emetophobia of being sick, and I just think I'd be sick in public. And one of the most helpful things, actually a colleague of mine said to me many years ago, she said, what's the worst that's going to happen? I said, well, I'm going to be sick on the tube, in the shop, and people will be horrified. And she said, do you really think people will be horrified? Or do you actually think that people will come and they will help you?
Yeah.
And I said, well, no, people will. I mean, it will be awful and it will be embarrassing and it would just be, I would feel dreadful. Yeah. But yes, actually, obviously, people would come and help.
Yeah.
Now, whilst I still didn't want to be sick, I did just used to then think to myself, and with all my other anxieties I won't mention today, what's the worst thing that is going to happen here? If I actually collapse, somebody will call an ambulance. Yeah. Somebody will do something.
Yeah. Do you know what that really makes me think of, Jamie? So it's going off a little bit on a tangent, but I feel like I want to share it anyway because somebody else might have the same experience as me. you saying what's the worst can happen. So after the breakdown that I had, I did go into therapy, private therapy for 18 months. And in one of my sessions, the therapist said to me, what's the worst that can happen? And at that point, we were talking about the fact that panic attacks always affected me in terms of my breathing. I felt like I was hyperventilating and couldn't breathe properly. And she said to me, what's the worst that can happen? And I looked at her in absolute horror, because up until about 2 minutes after this conversation, I always thought, if I stop breathing, I'm going to die, which I suppose technically you would. But basically, when we were talking through it, she said to me, so you're breathing really, really rapidly. And I'm like, no, I'm not really breathing rapidly. I can't breathe. I can't get the oxygen. What do you think will happen then? Well, I'll pass out. And what do you think will happen then? Well, then I'll die. And she gave me a very compassionate smile and said, your breathing is not dictated by your conscious mind. It's an automatic system. What would happen is when you're having a panic attack, you're very much in your subconscious and you are trying to consciously breathe. So you are confusing things. And what will happen is you will pass out, your breathing will be taken back over by the automatic system that makes you breathe every day, 24/7, 365 days a year, and you would wake up again. But up until that moment, Jamie, I honestly thought, I'm going to be unable to breathe and I'm going to die.
Mm.
And it was just, yeah, she asked me the exact same question as you said.
And that's just great, isn't it, to be able to ask yourself those questions.
Yeah, and you don't think of it at the time. What is the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
And I honestly thought that until she said that, you'd pass out and then you'd wake back up. And I was just like, whoa. And that really took the power out of it.
It took the power, exactly. It stops you in tracks, doesn't it?
It does.
And you think, well, I don't necessarily want that to happen, but that would not be the end of my world if
No,
that
exactly.
happened.
No, I'm not going to die.
And I think that's great. So hopefully Carol can take something from
some reassurance
those
for
answers. Moving on, we've got another question here from Bradley, and he has written in and said, how can I stop panic attacks from happening?
Okay.
Deep topic here. I mean, do you think, firstly, Tracy, we should just touch on what panic attacks? Would you like me to cover that briefly for the listeners?
You can cover that one.
So all the symptoms we've described here when we've spoken about anxiety are basically ramped up. And typically a panic attack will be palpitations, breathlessness, sweating, feeling sick, tingling or numbness in the hands and feet where the blood is diverted from the skin, a general feeling of impending doom, and they can be absolutely terrifying. They can happen in the day, they can be situational. If you are suffering from quite severe anxiety, they can just come out of nowhere. And you can also suffer from nocturnal panic attacks, which some people describe as the most terrifying at all, because you wake up from your sleep and there's a few seconds of calm, and then the panic attack hits you with all the symptoms I've just described. Now, of course, those symptoms may vary person to person, but typically that would be a panic attack, and even going into the hyperventilation for some people.
Yes.
They are very distressing. They are very depleting on the body's reserves. So people will often feel exhausted after a panic attack and need to lie down. It's like you've run a marathon. And as I say, they're just very, very distressing. So Bradley has asked, how can he stop these panic attacks from happening? And of course, Tracy, we can't stop them in a day, obviously, but we can give Bradley some advice on how he can manage them while they're there, and then take steps outside of that to lessen the frequency.
Yeah, because I'm actually thinking, as you're reading his question, I'm thinking, now does he mean stop them as they're happening, or does he mean stop them from happening in the future?
Well, I think he probably would like them to not happen at all.
Yeah. So
but maybe we could pick that apart.
To stop them happening in the moment,
Yes. Let's start there, I think.
Let's start there.
Yeah.
Okay, so to stop them happening in the moment, what you've got to remember is likely the panic attack is being driven by a subconscious program. Okay, something is triggering you for some reason. Now, a little bit of neuroscience, your conscious and subconscious minds cannot be, they cannot have center stage at the same time. So, because the panic attack is brought in by the subconscious mind, you can consciously distract yourself. You can do this by looking around yourself. You can do this by moving, changing your scenery. A really good little technique that I will mention here quickly that I was taught years ago is if you're somewhere and you have a pen or a pencil, pick up the pen and pencil and tell yourself a story about it. So you can say, I can pick up the pen and I can write on a piece of paper and I can write about a story about a big red dog, and I can publish the book. And literally you go on and on and on and just bore yourself senseless with this story, and you'll soon realize that your conscious mind has taken over and your subconscious has gone to sleep. Now, this only works for a short period of time, but hopefully if you are just being triggered off by a specific thing, that moment has passed.
Tracy and I have not discussed, have we, the tips you were going to give?
No, we haven't.
And can I just say that is the most, and I've had thousands of panic attacks, and I will talk about that in a future episode. That is the best thing that ever worked for me. What Tracy, and we haven't discussed this, what Tracy just said there is distraction.
Distraction.
So for me, it got to a stage where I was having nocturnal panic attacks. And my top tip, and I'll be more specific. So firstly was counting money. I had one of those huge, do you remember you used to get big plastic Coca-Cola jars, and
yeah.
you could get, I mean, God knows how much was in there. I should know, I counted it. Anyway, I just tip it on the floor, but I never realised it was the conscious mind.
Yes.
And I would just count money.
Yes.
So that was one thing. Secondly, I would paint my nails.
Yep.
Because I had to concentrate and stop shaking. Thirdly, at the time I was a video editor, freelance video editor, I would work.
Yeah.
And I would turn my computer on and I had to make the cuts and it all match up and do the mute, and I would work.
Yeah.
Best thing, distraction.
I used to do puzzles.
There we go. So listeners, you have got absolutely top tip there is distract. Change your state, distract yourself.
Yeah. But you have to really distract yourself.
Like you have to concentrate.
All of those things need a concentration.
Absolutely, that is it.
Trying to watch TV, read a book, it's not going to happen.
Didn't work.
Didn't work for me because you stare at the screen and nothing's going on. Your mind drifts. The same as reading a book. You just read the same line over and over and over again, and half hour later, you've still the words haven't gone in. So no, it had to be real intense. My brain has got to think about this distraction.
Fabulous. So if Bradley's in the middle of a panic attack, distraction is our top tip at the moment. Now, if he had meant, obviously, how can I stop them from happening in the first place? This is obviously a longer tail answer, isn't it? This is going to take longer.
Yeah.
And it is about dealing with that root cause of the anxiety in the first place. And I think, Tracy, that's what we're going to move on to anyway, handily, while we're answering Bradley's question. It's obviously we need for most people to discern, well, certainly what's the trigger? What's triggering them? You know, if not where they came from, and what's triggering them now? And deal with that. And I think until that has been dealt with, we're just scratching the surface. We need to get to that root cause. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like putting a plaster on a broken leg. It's not gonna fix it. If you go to the doctor and say my leg hurts and they put a bandage on it, or they put like a little plaster, it's not going to do anything. You need to find out what the problem is and treat it accordingly. So if it's that you have slipped into a really negative mindset, you can work on that. if it was like in my case, it was that combined with a really poor self-esteem, the therapy that I then had was all geared around my self-esteem, and then I, in the background, worked a lot on my mindset,
Mm.
and that's what helps. Then obviously the gradual exposure helped me regain my life. If it's hormone imbalance, you need to know that, because there's no point. You could maybe have a really good mindset and you could have really good self-esteem, but have unbalanced um,
Chemicals in the body,
chemicals,
yeah.
and you could have an imbalance of hormones, then that advice is not gonna it's not gonna be suitable, is it?
Mm.
So that's why it's really important to dig deep and find out what the cause is.
And Tracy, I think that's so, and we've said this all the way along. It's important, as you say, to rummage around in your brain yourself. We need to see the doctor to make sure there is no chemical imbalance. We need to have a rummage around with ourselves, or we can visit somebody like yourself
Yeah,
to think about what might have happened. It may be obvious. There may be a traumatic event that sticks out, and
yeah,
that is the obvious root
yeah,
cause. For me, I never knew what I still don't know. It's all immersed in murky childhood that I cannot remember.
yeah,
And honestly, now at 50, I don't want to remember. I've moved past it.
yeah,
I've been panic free for nearly a decade. I'm feeling so much better. I'm
yeah,
happy with that. And I think sometimes you just have to think, well, I don't now need to delve back. I
yeah.
can't remember. Nobody is forthcoming with information. So we must just try and deal with it and move on sometimes.
Yeah, and the fact that you have obviously, rather than just say, well, I can't remember, end of, you have obviously put in a lot of other work over
Yes.
the last few decades or
Yeah.
however long
Yeah.
that has helped eliminate it.
Yeah.
So taking action is absolutely key.
Mm.
Find out the root cause if you can. But if you can't, do work on the other things.
Yeah.
Because yeah, okay, it may, if it's really obviously a hormone imbalance, then deal with that. But there may also be other bits that you could work on.
Mm.
So I think it is a bit of a balance, but certainly something needs to change.
And I think, just want to say to the listeners, we are going to do more podcasts, aren't we, on anxiety?
Yeah, we're only
And
scratching the
we're
surface.
scratching the surface. And Tracy and I have both mentioned it's something that we've both experienced. And we do really want to explore it deeper and offer people some practical advice
Yes.
that can help them. And whether you're experiencing anxiety on a lighter end of the scale or on a deeper end of the scale, we want to help everybody.
Yeah.
And I know, for you, Tracy, it kind of came up upon you and stopped your life, didn't it? You were merrily going along, and then one day, boom, there it was. For me, I had it at 13, and I can only say, I feel like the line with Sigourney Weaver in Alien when she says, "You've been in my life for so long, I can't remember anything else." And it changed my life. It stopped me doing everything really in my 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
It affected my career. I couldn't go outdoors. I've lived with it for so long. And we are going to impart, aren't we, more of our knowledge on this as we
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah.
But we do very much want people to email in and let us know their questions
Yes.
and thoughts. So
That's
we
really,
can,
really important. So that when we do revisit this, that we can help more people.
absolutely.
Because as I say, we have our own experiences, and we
Yeah.
have the knowledge from speaking to other people and working with other people. But as we've already proved today, it's a very wide ranging topic with very wide ranging causes and symptoms. So the more people that write in and give us their experiences or even just their questions, the more people we can help.
That's great. So we're going to leave you with some top tips. We're going to go in an order.
I'm going to go for a couple of in the moment practical tips.
Fabulous.
Okay, so they're my two favourite that I share with all my clients. When you are in fight or flight, i.e., when you're anxious, your mouth will become dry. Okay, the reason for this is when you're facing that saber-toothed tiger, the only important thing is the adrenaline and cortisol that's helping you get the hell out of there and get away and preserve life. Having a drink or having something to eat at that moment in time is not important, okay? So what actually happens when you're in that state is your mouth will go really, really dry, okay? So what can happen is when we're anxious and our mouth goes dry, it's another way of backing up to the brain that there's something wrong. So therefore you can biohack that backwards. So when you are feeling anxious, have a bottle of water with you and just frequently just have a little sip of water. Keep your mouth moist and wet, okay? Because that sends a signal to the mind, everything's okay. Goes back to when you were saying earlier that sometimes people can't eat when they're feeling really anxious. Well, that's because, again, when you're running away from a saber-toothed tiger, eating is the last thing on your mind. Your digestive systems actually shut down at that point, and all the blood goes to your extremities so you can run or fight. Okay, so by having a little drink, and if you can, maybe a little something to eat, you're just telling your body actually everything's okay. So that would be my first tip. And again, it's easy. There's water everywhere. Take a bottle of water around with you. It's easy done. The other thing is, not a lot of people know this. We have parasympathetic fibers in our lips, and therefore it's the parasympathetic nervous system that we want to activate. Okay, that's the rest and digest, the calm zone. Okay, that's where we want to get to. So by activating the parasympathetic fibers in our lips, it helps us get back into that. And all you have to do that is just rub your finger along your lip as if you're just rubbing in lip seal or something like that. Rub the finger backwards and forwards a few times and it activates that system and it will help get you back into it.
Tracy, that's fantastic.
I thought you might like it.
I absolutely love that. And my final tip is what Tracy mentioned earlier and I backed up, is the distraction.
Yeah.
So in the moment, a heightened anxiety, panic attack is your distraction. Get to a place where you can concentrate on a task at hand.
Yeah.
Tracy, what a fantastic podcast.
It's been a real good one.
Really enjoyed today. Yeah. As we've said a million times, we're going to say it again. If you've got any questions or thoughts or ideas for another podcast, please email us at wellbeingunwrapped@gmail.com and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks for listening.
If you've been affected by any of the topics discussed today, you can find further help, advice and support at www.anxietyuk.org.uk or at www.nhs.uk. Thank you for listening to Wellbeing Unwrapped. If you found this episode helpful today, please subscribe, leave a review and share it with anyone you think might benefit.
Yes, Jamie, the more reviews we get, the more people we can reach and help with our podcast.
And don't forget to reach out to us at wellbeingunwrapped@gmail.com with your feedback and any questions you may have for our next episode.